Welcome guys. It's Wednesday. What does that mean? Well, it means we're going to try and put out a Q&A. So today I've got a couple of cool questions for you. One of them I think I'm going to get a little bit ranty and high horsey on, so hopefully that's fun. As always, if while I'm talking there's something you think's interesting or something new comes to your mind, just drop a question in the comments below. That's exactly what I'll be reading for the next episode, which hopefully should be out on next Wednesday or whenever we can get around to it. So, first question comes from Richard C. Schleppy II. Great name, who says, Ari, Master of Peace, and the Egg. So we'll start off with a little bit of lore here, guys. He says, an interesting thought. If they received the egg during their venture to retrieve Glint's body, why did they wait a year before taking it to the Exalted? Instead, it seems that perhaps either the Zephyrite made a second trip to the Crystal Desert to get the egg during Living World Season 2, or they got it somewhere else. I think this is more likely, which raises the question, not just who gave it to them, but where. Well, I don't know whether I really agree with your line of thinking here that that egg scene happened somewhere else. If that was true, why would we have the visions of the Master of Peace receiving the egg right there in Glint's lair? That just doesn't seem to make sense. I really do think that it happened in Glint's lair. That would be a very odd thing narratively to do, to set up this basic fact that really doesn't need any mystery around it. Where did we get the egg? And then twist it in a weird way? No, I think this is something else, and I think it just could be an example of bad writing, actually. It's something really struck me while I was doing the Glint mysteries recently. This was a video whereby we talked about Glint's first scion, the first baby from Guild Wars 1. And anyway, that led me to doing some Season 2 content. And something really struck me. There are some weird inconsistencies now when you look back at some of the ways that the devs set things up. Alright, so let's try and write this story. Let's see what they're doing. They're saying that the Zephyrite were members of the Brotherhood of the Dragon, communicated with Glint, collaborated with her, and presumably from this deep time, they knew of the Exalted, they knew of Tyria, and they knew of various elements of Glint's plan, but not necessarily the egg. So then Glint goes off and hangs out with Destiny's Edge during the events of the novel and gets herself killed in a risky attempt to just finish off Kralkatorrik super fast. She dies and the Zephyrite return to her body. You say here, Richard, that you think that this happened about a year before we met them. I actually think it was more like 7 years. I think they probably went there very quickly after Glint died. When they return there, they find Glint's body. They don't find Kralkatorrik himself. Kralkatorrik is presumably still in the Crystal Desert, but nowhere near the Glint's lair itself. And so they go specifically to recover Glint's body and stop powermongers and nefarious peoples from drawing power from it. Very cool. When they're there, they get this mysterious vision from a character we don't really know, possibly Gleam, and the Master of Peace received the egg and is told to guard it with his life. He's not told anything more. He's just told to protect the egg. And so then the Zephyrite go off, and then there's about a 7-year period at max where, what do? They do protect the egg, but they spend their time flying around and exploring the world and trading instead of immediately going to Tyria, which would have easily been the smartest thing for them to do. Now, they may or may not have known about Morgemoth, but it's a particularly nutty idea for the Zephyrite to wait around for ages with the hindsight we now have, knowing that they're going to deposit the egg in an area right on the doorstep of another Elder Dragon. So why would they wait? Is this just weird, inconsistent, bad writing? Are we ever going to get an answer to this? There are a few theories maybe you can go into. One of the craziest ones might be that they actually wanted to wait for Morgemoth to wake up for this crazy Sylvari chick Scarlet to kickstart a bunch of stuff so that, you know, there'd be lots of magic. Maybe they knew that the egg would need lots of magic and the time wasn't right for it to be in Tyria. What was the point? I don't know how much I really believe in that, though. And think about this. If they had gone early and they had put in Tyria early, when Scarlet redirected all that magic going for Morgemoth, maybe the egg could have intercepted it and the egg would have woken up instead of Morgemoth and we'd be in an even better position. So it could have been a huge mistake to wait. One of the other big important parts of this story that isn't clear to us in any way is when the Exalted woke up and why the Exalted woke up. Now, as far as I understand, the story is that the Exalted became active in response to Glint's egg and because they were supposed to protect the egg. But what exactly caused that? The wiki states kind of weirdly, and don't forget the wiki, the information there is added by players, so I don't know what this is really based on. But they say that the Exalted became active in 1326 AE, when Glint's egg became active, and the Master of Peace was taking it to the city. What? The egg became active? What does that mean? Does that mean that the egg was just sort of a normal egg for a while and then it started glowing and that's what signaled the Zephyrite to move? And this also happened to be the same time that the Exalted woke up? They just kind of don't explain it. That could be one of the best ways to answer it, but I don't think we've had that explicit information given to us. I was always under the impression that the Exalted were asleep until the Master of Peace moved it there, and then they detected its presence in the air and woke up. Not that the egg itself has an active and inactive state. That's just weird, isn't it? But that could be an explanation for the 7 years. Like, there's no reason to go to Tyria earlier than that because all the Exalted are asleep and there's no defense anyway. Perhaps, and my favorite theory here is actually that you could just say it's up to ignorance. These are people who just learned how to fly with their crystals. You know, they are just dudes, right? Maybe they really wanted to explore the world. Maybe they didn't quite realize the job that they'd been tasked with. Maybe Glint didn't explain this to them well enough. They didn't put 2 and 2 together. They were just protecting the egg. And what's the best way to protect the egg? Well, let's go miles up into the sky where pretty much nothing can get to us. They haven't really established an idea of a flying, you know, particularly dominated dragon to us yet, right? Even though presumably they all can sort of fly. You get what I mean? And so maybe they were just like, all right, this is the best way to protect it. Let's just go in the sky. How are we going to fund ourselves? Let's trade. And that was kind of their job. So then the question really becomes, if you buy that, what changed? Why was it suddenly, after their second appearance at the Labyrinthine Cliffs, the Master of Peace was all of a sudden dead set on flying over Drytop towards the Muguma jungle? He accidentally got shot down at that time. Then he went off to proceed on foot trying to get the egg to Tyria. What happened at that exact moment? How did that information come to him that they weren't doing the right thing by just flying around in the sky all the time and they needed to deposit this egg off somewhere? I really would like an answer to this at some point. In fact, I'd love a mini mission, like a fractal or a flashback or something, set on the Zephyrite fleet while it's in the sky, kind of like Ara's story mode, but with lots of ships all around, and you get to play, maybe it's the moment where they get bombed or whatever and betrayed by some of the Sylvari on board, and that would be a perfect opportunity for them to give us those details. Right now, it just feels like some poorly planned out story, and they could turn it into something really, really cool. The Zephyrite altogether just seem like a really weird outlier now, because they should have a bigger stake in this story, and yet they've done nothing since getting shot out of the sky. There are a couple of other weird oddities around this time too, like for example in that same mission, Ogden says to you after you witness this thing with the egg, he says, okay, so I guess the Master of Peace has got the egg, and you say to Ogden Stonehealer, also a member of the Brotherhood of the Dragon, you say, oh, Ogden, where might he have gone with the egg? And Ogden says he doesn't know. Really? You don't know where the Master of Peace might have gone. You are a member of the Brotherhood of the Dragon. You presumably know about the Exalted. You presumably know about Tyria. You know the region of the world that the Zephyrite's in. You know they just made a beeline for that place. You know that he's still heading further off to the west. And you don't know, you can't put 2 and 2 together after your hundreds of years of existence that maybe he's going to the Exalted. You don't think now might be the time to tell us about that? Well, no, Ogden doesn't know. And so it just sticks out like a sore thumb. It's obvious why we didn't get that information originally, because they wanted to keep the existence of the Exalted and stuff off for a reveal in Heart of Thorns. Or maybe it's just because they hadn't concepted that far out. You guys might think that this whole question that I'm responding to here, I'm being very nitpicky, right? But actually, what struck me when I was making this Glint video is these things are going to become more and more prominent. What we've got in Guild Wars at the moment is a situation where the devs take a long time to put the story in, right? It takes months to get the next chapter out, and then a couple of months for the next chapter, and a couple of months for the next chapter. And the result has been, especially with Heart of Thorns being so short, that you can actually play all of Living World Season 2, Heart of Thorns, and everything from Season 3 so far in like a day. It's like a long afternoon of gameplay. You can go through the entire thing. You can see the story in bulk right there. And so actually, this Ogden comment, for someone who's playing it in serial, is still going to be really fresh on your mind, even after you finish Heart of Thorn, because it's actually not that much story that you've gone through. And when that happens, you realize that stuff is starting to not line up. Obviously, it's hard for the devs because they've been juggling it for multiple years, but for players, you can whiz through it quite quickly, and then that's when it's like, not everything is meeting. So I hope that doesn't become a bigger problem. Stuff like that's going to start sticking out more and more and more. It's going to take a really monumental feat of really knowing where their story's going and all the components of it from the devs to make sure too much of this stuff doesn't stand out in a weird way. So anyway, yeah, very interesting question. I wonder what you guys think about some of those inconsistencies. Let's move on. Next question is from Ramoth Mizpah, who wanted to talk a little about bit about Colin. I get a lot of questions about Colin. So this one here, I figure I'll dive into properly. I talk mostly about this on the stream, so let's do it in a Q&A, right? He says, hey WP, kudos to you for putting the video together. Very well done. Shows a lot of integrity on your part. Thanks. This was to do with the legendary weapon things. Here's my question. Do you think that the recent increase in content development are directly due to Mo taken over, or is it mere coincidence? Had Colin stayed with ArenaNet, do you think things would be the same as they are now? Not saying Colin was the problem. I genuinely liked from what I saw of the guy, but sometimes new managers have different take on handling things, and maybe Mike's is just more effective. Okay, alright, well, so straight away, I would say no, not everything would be the same. If Colin was still there, not everything would be the same. We know it wouldn't. Legendary weapons, I don't know whether they would have been cancelled. I don't know whether we would have got current events. There are probably several other little changes as well. But the general scope of the game, I really don't know whether I or any of us are in a position to say that. Generally, I'm kind of cynical to the idea that it would have been dramatically different if Colin had stayed. I think a lot of this stuff was probably set on course a long time ago. Don't forget as well that for all the praise Mike is now getting, he is still sort of just like a split role. He's running the company and doing the game direction, so presumably he can't put as much focus into that role as someone like Colin originally would have. But I kind of want to clarify some of my opinions on this. Colin's fall from grace, all right, shall we say, is a really interesting thing to me. I'd just like to preface this by saying that I'm a bit of a grumpy douche, okay? I don't get all into the dumb memes and the circus hype about various things about this game, okay? I say this, I point out my grumpy doucheness, because I want to be very clear that for as long as Colin worked at the company, I was never idolizing him and hyperventilating at the thought of the dude like a lot of us in the community were. I like Colin a lot, don't get me wrong. I thought he brought a great presence to the game. I liked that we had this fun community joke about his smile and stuff like that, even if I wasn't as actively involved with it as some others. And mostly, I really did respect the work that I knew Colin had done back in Guild Wars 1, right? Like the Tengu bonus mission pack. I loved that thing. I thought that it showed some real strengths, and he obviously had some chops as a designer. But outside of all that stuff, okay, I honestly have no idea to the extent of the work he did for Guild Wars 2 in the capacity of game director. I have no idea what his management style was. I have no idea what the strength of his vision was, or even what his specific vision was. Nor do I really know any details of what it actually means in the nitty-gritty to be a game director, specifically at ArenaNet, at that company, okay? I have no idea, just like actually you, dear listener, also have basically no idea. None of us really do, because none of us actually worked there. So I think it's really rich for us to make speculations like this sometimes. In fact, if anything, I always got the impression that a lot of the Guild Wars 2 development teams were fairly autonomous. And don't forget that the role of game director is not just about your vision for the game and stuff, but it's also interfacing with the community. That's a big part of the role, and I don't think you can really fault Colin on that half, right? So anyway, I do think it's a bit ridiculous, exceedingly ridiculous, actually, for anyone to sit here now, and just because the game's seen improvements since Colin's departure, to claim that the man was somehow dragging the game down or that he was bad at his job. I think a lot of this is, yeah, circumstantial. Correlation does not equal causation, people. The internet tends to be very good at one thing, I'd say, and that's taking something it knows next to nothing about and making very bold claims, usually based on flimsy and anecdotal evidence. And I think that's exactly what's been happening here, whenever somebody says that Colin wasn't very good at their job. The thing I find particularly absurd beyond this is just how quickly some of these claims have been made that Colin was somehow bad and it's all so much better now. Like, it was the very next patch. The next patch. There is such a thing as a development backlog, people. They don't just magic up content and plans for content and workflows that they adhere to out of nowhere. It takes months to develop this stuff, months to create the engine tools, months to figure out how many teams you'll have and what exactly they're working on and release cadences. Okay, Colin left on the 4th of March this year. You think that Colin didn't know about the Rising Flames patch? You think he didn't know how Season 3 is probably going to segue into the next expansion? You think he didn't have a hand in the decision to have a dedicated group permanently working on the next expansion this whole time? You think he wasn't aware of stuff like the World vs. World initiative for player polling that started exactly around that time? He will have had a hand in all of that stuff, and he will have had a hand in the creation of the systems that have developed that stuff. there are definitely some things he obviously had no hand in that we are now seeing the fruits of, okay? Legendaries ending, perhaps current events coming in, and other little things that we have no real way of knowing, and definitely lots of stuff that hasn't manifested yet. But I think we're only just now going to be seriously seeing the effects of someone else's game direction, okay? And even when we do, I would suspect Colin had a hand in some of the groundwork for it. I also think that people are oversimplifying the situation when it comes to just how much impact he has on the game. Like, I know he had the tag of game director, but that really doesn't make him the be-all and end-all, guys, that you can pin every problem ever on. I'd suspect that a lot of people saying this kind of stuff have never been a part of maybe a workplace at all, or a large workplace team, let alone one of 200-ish people all working on the same thing, okay? I'd hazard that these people have no idea just how much input goes from how many different areas into software development from so many people, okay? There are a ton of different variables here, a ton of different iteration that comes more from just one guy. Colin won't have been in control of everything. He won't have been in control of bad decisions made by other team members that sounded okay on paper, but you have no way of knowing whether they're really going to work out. He will have had no control over key departures that occur at really unfortunate times that can maybe seriously hit the amount of content they can put out, or how quickly they can roll into Living World, or even basic little things like people having to take months off because they're sick. The title Game Director is not a shield for you to be able to sling mud while being equally ignorant of what exactly that title means for that company at the same time. So, yeah, I'm pretty cynical that really his departure has meant the world. Let me be clear, I do appreciate there is a chance Colin really was bad at his job, and it really is his fault that everything was bad, and now that he's gone, everything's amazing. But I see no real sincere evidence or place for that coming from us in the community. We're just not in a position to know. And when it comes down to being an asshole about someone or not, based on no evidence, I'd rather not be an arsehole, give people the benefit of the doubt. Is that really so hard? And remember, as I said at the start, I don't say this out of some weird need to protect the guy because I super desperately like him. I think I'm just being logical. I've always been a fan of that saying that the more you know about something, the less sure you are on something. Well, maybe stop for a second, guys, the next time you're going to lambast the dude and have a think about that, yeah? So yeah, that's my opinions on the Colin thing. We'll see what you guys have to say. Next question is about some lore. We're going to talk about Kuunavang. I've mentioned Kuunavang a little bit recently. A lot of people have enjoyed that, by the way, because Kuunavang is sort of the forgotten child in a lot of cases. And for some really hardcore Guild Wars 1 players, Kuunavang is still sort of a fan favorite. So the question is, quick question for anybody who knows, which Elder Dragon was Kuunavang a champion for, or was he just a dragon living on Cantha? Well, so the answer to this is very simple. It's that we don't know. We don't know whether he is just a dragon living on Cantha with no master, or she, sorry, or whether she is a subordinate of an Elder Dragon, and we don't know the identity of who that dragon is. See, that's what's so interesting about quotes like the one I mentioned in the Movement of the World. They seem to originally suggest that both Glint and Kuunavang had no connection at all, that there was a night and day difference, and you really shouldn't think about Glint or Kuunavang as being important anymore. That's what we had, and then all of a sudden, oh no, Glint is really important. So is that gonna parallel for Kuunavang as well? The theory is, immediately, that if that is true, I think most people have settled on the deep sea dragon being Kuunavang's master, that the deep sea dragon could have been swimming around Cantha and doing that stuff there for a while. But I want to dive into that other idea, that really she was just a dragon living on Cantha. At first, that might not sound very exciting, because obviously you want to tie into the Elder Dragons and the epic stories that are going on with Guild Wars 2. But Cantha is kind of interesting when it comes to dragons. Remember that Cantha is kind of an Asian-themed setting, and they really dived into this whole idea of dragons being a part of the culture. And so what they set up with Cantha was this, actually, guys, that Cantha was full of dragons. Not just Elder Dragon style things that are angry and hate us, but intelligent, friendly, happy, communicative dragons. Dragons that were associated with luck, and it was more than just even the salt sprays, which we're fairly familiar with. But you guys might hear me saying that and then think, well, hold on, WP, I played factions and I don't remember having a blast chatting to all these random dragons all over the place. That's because of the Jade Wind. By the time we got to experience Cantha in Guild Wars 1, the Jade Wind had occurred 200 years prior, and it was this giant magical explosion coming from the Harvest Temple that froze the Jade Sea, froze the Echo Valley Forest, and corrupted the residents of these regions of the world. And that meant that all these nice, happy dragons that were everywhere were now crazed and they were mad and they were enraged by the effects of the Jade Wind. So we never really got to have much fun with them. There was like 1 or 2 quests, I think, where we actually got to interact with dragons that weren't corrupted. And that's about it. I don't even really remember the specifics of those quests anymore. By the way, as I mentioned that should have rang a couple of bells for you guys. People becoming mindless because of a magical explosion. Sounds a hell of a lot like what just happened in Bloodstone Fen, no? Maybe there's a suggestion there that the effects of the explosion at the Harvest Temple way back when was very similar to what we saw with the Bloodstones, and they could set something like that up. Maybe the madness we're seeing in Bloodstone Fen is the same madness that corrupted these dragons and other characters like Urgos. So, back to the idea of Kuunavang. Maybe Kuunavang was just one of these dragons, just bigger, more powerful, more old. Maybe she's sort of like the mother of all of those, and that's about it. Don't forget that there is a suggestion now, the elder dragons like Zaitan and Jogbag and stuff, maybe they were just sort of regular creatures at one point. Does that mean the dragons of Cantha are these really old, ancient things, older even than the Giganticus lupicus, perhaps? And that they are all potential elder dragons or something? The story could go really, really, really deep there. Cantha's got some great story threads, honestly, like, not even looking at stuff like the Wardens and the Sylvari connections and stuff. I'm very much looking forward to when and if we finally get to go there and get some of those answers. Kuunavang is an interesting story, definitely. And I guess for the last question, I spent way too long ranting on some of these today, guys. More stuff about the Elder Dragons. Another lore question. Hey, WP, do you think the Elder Dragon Kraukatoric has the ability to see the future since Glint inherited his power? I won't spend too long on this, but it is an interesting topic. My answer actually is no. So, it's a fun idea to think that maybe he does, right? Like, Glint was known for having 2 specific powers. Yeah, she was a big badass dragon, she was strong, she was whatever, she was old. Okay, but she had 2 powers. One, she was a telepath, and the other, yes, she had this prophetic ability. It's a very scary idea then to think, well, hold on, she's from Kraukatoric, maybe she got these abilities from him, and the idea of an elder dragon that is also prophetic, that can see the future, that's a pretty mind-blowing idea, right? Like, the thought that he can just see off any plan we have to defeat him prematurely, and we just lose again and again and again. That's very, very exciting. It would push the franchise into a very time-travel-y direction, which I'm not sure I want to see. Time travel is everywhere, in so many shows, so many books, so many movies. And we have touched on it a little bit in Guild Wars before, but I don't know whether I'd want to see it take such a front seat. But it is one of those very epic, menacing ideas. But I kind of say no because of the telepath side of things. See, the interesting thing about Glint is she's different from the Elder Dragons. She empathized with us. She liked us. She protected us. And why? Why did she care about us when all these other dragon champions and dragons don't? It's because she had this ability to read our minds and to understand that we have hopes and lives and desires and care about Tyria in a certain way that the Elder Dragons don't. And it's because of that she ended up sort of coming to our aid. The point is that Kraukatoric doesn't have that component, and these other Elder Dragons don't necessarily have it. So if Kraukatoric doesn't have mind reading, but Glint does have mind reading, isn't there a chance that Glint does have the gift of prophecy and so forth, but Kraukatoric doesn't? Like, these are special things to Glint. I think maybe that's not so unreasonable to suggest. There's also some other fun ideas, right? Like, maybe they could play with the concept that Glint didn't have prophetic ability at all, but she was able to read the mind of someone who did, or she was reading the mind of a time traveler or something. Oh, that would be pretty interesting. Maybe that's how they bring Baotek back into the story. Oh, that'd be great. Anyway, there you go, guys. That's the Q&A for today. Thank you very much for listening. I know we didn't get through too many questions. Please leave plenty of them down below. I will get back to you as soon as possible. Very curious to hear your thoughts on the Colin thing. Am I being a bit harsh about it? Do people have a legitimate top point on that? Or is it really all as stupid as I'm making it out to be? Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoy yourselves. Have a wonderful day. And I'll see you for another video tomorrow. Catch you next time, guys. Brand spanking new sequel. In it, we were told there would be a 250-year time jump.